Cinderella, every little girl's dream come true. After 6 films of not having a continuing story run all the way through, this was finally a return to the 3-act structure. Cinderella, the famous fairy tale, tells the story of a young woman who's been turned into a maid by her stepmother and her evil stepsisters. Her bunch of animal friends help her out, of course, and try to keep things jolly. But when the night of the ball approaches and she isn't able to go, her fairy godmother appears and gives her a dress and carriage to make it out there. I guess by this point it was trying to return to the roots of Snow White. You got the pretty damsel, you have the animal sidekicks, they have a softer, more realistic human being as the main star as opposed to a cuddly animal. And of course you have the evil, terrifying villains. I guess Cinderella is one of those that gets harped on a lot for being very anti-feminist. Just wait around, wish, and your dreams will come true. First of all, didn't Pinocchio start that? And second, I don't know, from a male point of view growing up, I never thought she was that bad. I always saw a lot of patience with her. I mean, yeah, I guess she never really did anything, but at the same time, the fact that she was willing to put up with so much and yet still find some happiness in her everyday life, there's gotta be some really good values in there. As a character, there isn't really too much else to her, but to be honest, the virtues I listed before, I think those are enough. The villain is great. I love that by simply having control over one person's life, this can be one of the great Disney baddies. The way she's animated, the way she stares, the way she smiles, she's a great one. The songs, of course, everybody knows, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and so forth. And the animation is sort of a nice return to those softer colors that were made popular in Snow White and Fantasia. One of my main problems again, though, is the prince. God, does he even get a line in this movie? His dad actually has more dialogue. In fact, the movie is much more about the dad wanting him to fall in love than him actually wanting to fall in love. Maybe taking an angle from the prince's point of view might have been more interesting. But maybe if you did, you'd see just how really twisted and kind of sick this story is. Hey, he found a woman strictly based on sight. Hey, he knew her for a few hours and then he decided she's the one. Hey, all she left is a shoe, and yet somehow that's gonna determine which woman you're going to marry. Hey, coincidentally the shoe size can only fit one friggin' woman in the entire world, and thank God it just happened to be the one you fell in love with. Yeah, I guess that is a little screwed up. As the Disney films go, especially the ones that sort of use the traditional princessy formula, this one's okay. It's got some really good moments, some really good song sequences, and like I said, a really cool villain. But a lot of it also seems like filler. Just the animals sort of walking around, being goofy, having fun, when really you could have been spending that time developing some of the other characters. Like, oh, I don't know, again, the friggin' prince! But the artwork is pretty impressive too. Watching it again, I really like the scale that they give a lot of these houses and castles. They actually do make it seem rather massive. And this is before widescreen. It's the basic return to the classic fairy tale, and it does it pretty decently. And any problems it does have story-wise, I think you can attribute to just the time period and, well, the fact that it is a fairy tale. Well, a lot of them were just sort of written this way. I think it holds up okay. Not one of my personal favorites, but it's definitely pretty good. Whenever people hear the title Alice in Wonderland, usually the first thing they think of is the Disney version. And yeah, actually that's not such a bad version to think of. The story about a young girl who finds herself trapped in a very strange, mysterious land is much more based on the journey than finding twists or turns. The character of Alice is a bit of a blank slate. She's the normal person that's supposed to play off all the weird, strange things that she comes across. It plays very much like a road trip movie. You come across something strange, you have an encounter with it, and then you move on to the next strange thing. Like I said, the focus is not the twists and turns, but all the oddities that she comes across. It's like Dante's Inferno, it's more a study of what you're seeing than what you're experiencing. But with that said, the girl that got to play Alice is actually pretty good. Her name's Catherine Beaumont, and she does a really good job actually giving some character to this person. The dialogue from Alice in Wonderland is not easy to recite, and it's not easy to make casual. But she does a pretty good job. She's curious, she's polite, she's nice, but can be pushed to her limits. She tries to join in the fun, but often just finds herself too frustrated. And she's also very logical, which makes a lot of sense in a story like this because this is a world where logic almost has no place.
He went that way.
Who did?
The White Rabbit.
He did?
He did what?
Went that way.
Who did?
The White Rabbit.
What rabbit?
But didn't you just say? Oh dear.
Can you stand on your head?
My favorite characters are your favorite characters. I love the Mad Hatter, I love the March Hare, I love the Cheshire Cat. They're all absolutely crazy, but at the same time I think the fun with them is that you never know if they're threatening or not. Their mood swings are just so fast and you never know if something really dangerous is going to happen or if they're just playing along. Half the time I don't even think they know.
You may have noticed that I'm not all there myself.
The Queen is one of my favorite funny villains. Actually, watching her again, I realized I actually did take a lot of the nostalgia critic from this character. Just how quickly she can turn from calm and collected to just screaming like a little child. I really do love pathetic, whiny brats in a grown-up body, but somehow have a ton of power. And I love watching Alice trying to figure out what's the right thing to say and right thing to do because she knows at any second her head could be gone. And actually, that's a pretty dark aspect to the story, isn't it? How many characters do actually get their heads chopped off in this movie? Just because they don't show it doesn't mean it isn't happening. It's pretty grim. Wonderland itself is very different from other interpretations. It doesn't have a bright, colorful background, it's very black. Most of the backgrounds are black. But that's always great because when color does come in, it's always bright, it's always clashing, and it always pops. Some people have problems that they cut out too much from the original books, and, well, it's a Disney film, and an anime one at that. You sort of have to get whatever you're given. I will say, with all the forced Disney sequels out there, how come this never got one? There is literally a sequel book to Alice in Wonderland. Why didn't they just change things around a bit and start putting in some of the other characters? Like the Knight, the Turtle, the Griffin. There's a ton of areas you could go with this. But oh well. What I do like about Alice in Wonderland is that it does make the transition into movie form. That's the trap I think a lot of other movie versions fall into, is that they try to follow the book a little too closely. Ironically, with the Tim Burton one, I don't think they followed it enough, but I've complained about that enough before. Alice in Wonderland is creative, it looks great, it's a wonderful journey movie, and the majority of it works because the main character is just so likable. I have very few complaints about it, except honestly, I would have liked to have seen more. But I guess that's a good complaint to have. If you're looking for a movie that's big on story, surprises, and character development, this is probably not the place to look. But I think most people going into Alice in Wonderland know what they're gonna get. And in my opinion, this is one of the better versions. I always said that Peter Pan was sort of like every little boy's fantasy. I mean, think about it. You got pirates, you got flying, you got Indians, you got faraway lands, you got mermaids. If somehow they worked in cowboys and spacemen, this movie would be set. And for what the story is, Disney does it pretty well. They of course put some changes here and there, but they still get the characteristics of these people down really great. Pan himself is very cocky and sure of himself, and I have to admit he is a little bit a product of the times. Something about that voice and the way he looks, you can definitely tell it was done in the 50s.
Of course. That's why I like him. I tell him to the Lost Boys.
But he never uses any current catchphrases or anything. Wendy, once again, is portrayed by Catherine Beaumont. Again, sort of taking your bland, typical innocent and turning into something really entertaining.
She's a wonderful nurse, although Father says...
Girls talk too much.
Yes, girls talk to... Oh.
Well, get on with it, girl.
My name is Wendy. Wendy Mora Angela Dawn.
Wendy's enough.
Oh.
I'm kind of surprised they didn't use her in more films after this. You got John the geek and Michael the cute innocent, and they all go off on an adventure to Never Never Land, where they never have to grow up. The Lost Boys are typical delinquents, and the pirates are typical pirates. But what I really love about this movie is Captain Hook. Again, this is sort of the Captain Hook most people think of when they think of Peter Pan. Threatening, but he's also really, really funny. Smee as well is sort of the definitive Smee. He wants to be mean-spirited, but he's just too bumbling and nice. Plus, when you put the two of them together with the crocodile, dude, this is some of the best slapstick you'll ever see. The timing, the pacing, the expressions, it kills me every single time I watch these scenes. The romance between Wendy and Peter is just perfect. It's not overdone, they never actually share a kiss on screen. It's very much done like how real little kids fall in love. The girl often wants it more and the boy doesn't know what the hell to think of it. Tinkerbell is a nice, bitchy character that also gets her redemption at the end. And the Indians, they're definitely an archetype of what we thought Native Americans were at that point. But I don't know, it's sort of like the Black Crows from Dumbo. I never really found them that insulting. I thought they were cool. That song, What Makes the Red Man Red? I love that song. It still sticks in my head.
What made the red man red? What made the red man red?
Peter Pan seems to get the childlike adventure down pretty well. For little kids, it's pretty gender neutral. The girls can get into the romance and the mermaids and the flying and such, while the boys can get into the sword fighting, the pirates, and all that good stuff. The energy is great, the imagination is great, it's just a good old-fashioned fun kids movie. It's definitely one of Disney's most biggest trademarks for a reason. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is not an unknown movie. It gets a lot of attention, and whenever somebody mentions the name, they either think of the book or this version. But I do feel bad as a lot of modern audiences seem to dismiss it, and to be honest, I can kinda see why. Not that it's bad, it's actually really good. But when you have something as adult and groundbreaking as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and then you have the name Walt Disney attached to it, yeah, a lot of people seem to think that it's gonna be a musical or corny, and honestly, it's very adult. And when I say adult, I don't mean trying to get the PG-13 rating up by having swear words and gore and, I don't know, whatever the hell Pirates 3 did. I'm talking about actual adult characters, actual grown-ups, actual good dialogue, actual intriguing ideas. Yeah, remember those? You could still get away with that with a G rating, and still have it be a live-action film. I'm getting ahead of myself. What's the story? Well, there's rumors of a giant sea monster that's apparently taking down a lot of ships. So one ship is sent out to try and find it and destroy it. Two of the crew members are Kirk Douglas and Peter Lorre. But once the supposed sea monster destroys that ship, our two heroes, along with another survivor, swim aboard this sea monster apparently and discover that's actually a submarine, at a time when really there were no submarines. This submarine is led by Captain Nemo, played by James Mason. That's three pretty damn big stars at the time right there, James Mason, Kirk Douglas, and Peter Lorre. All very distinct in their acting styles and work off each other very well. What's Nemo's plan? It turns out he's sick of humanity and the world, so he decides to retire to the sea. But he's so sick of all the misery and war that humanity makes for itself that he decides to step in and try to destroy anything he sees as disrupting the peace. He's cold and stern, but is just trying to do what he feels is best for all of mankind. He doesn't trust our castaways, but over time he does manage to open up to them, treating them less like prisoners and more like members of the crew. As Disney films go, this is probably the most subdued, and that's saying a lot seeing how there's a giant squid that attacks. There are some really groundbreaking effects and some really good visuals. The smart dialogue and the development of the characters is so clear-cut that it's hard not to like them. Their ideologies, their intelligence, their characteristics, everything about them makes them so distinct but also so enjoyable. The effects are also really something. This squid probably would be done with CG nowadays, but back then, they just used a life-size puppet. Originally it was shot during the day and Disney said it looked too fake, so he recommended that they do it in a storm. That way it hides the strings a lot better. The idea of shooting a monster in a storm or in the dark in order to hide what it looks like would be used years later, both for atmosphere and to hide the technicals behind making it. There's definitely changes from the book, but I feel it really still got the spirit of both the characters and the technology really well. And even when they're doing something as silly as fighting a giant squid or using electricity to fight off these natives, it still works because of the dedication of both the atmosphere and the actors. It's kind of like with Indiana Jones. Yeah, when you get down to it, it's a pretty stupid story. But Harrison Ford's performance and just how seriously the direction is taking it makes it one of the great action classics. And while this isn't really an action film per se, I'd say it does make some really big strong stands for sci-fi and fantasy. But I guess that's why it has such a hard time finding such a dedicated audience. Fans of typical Disney probably won't get into so much dialogue and so much technical talk, and only one or two fight sequences. But fans of that stuff probably can't get too much into, like, say, Kirk Douglas's little musical number or the fact that he has a sidekick seal. But for me, I think they blend perfectly. It has just enough to keep kids from falling asleep, but also has just enough for the parents not to change the channel. I think it's a good mix, even if it does lean more towards the adult side, which, now that I'm adult, I find I like even more. It's got good adventure, good actors, and good talent telling one of the most famous sci-fi stories of all time. I say it's definitely worth checking out.